What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today we need to take a little bit of a look at Blackbeard. Marshall D. Teach is finally coming as a leader in OP09. It is not our first leader with Lim the other day, remember, but we have got our first leader here. And oh my word, this Blackbeard leader looks very, very good. If nothing else, it looks extremely interesting. And that makes me very, very happy. Now, I have done the translations here myself. I did check with some people over on the Facebook group. But it is as I suspected. We got a mono black leader, 5,000 power, 5 life, all fairly standard. And like we saw with Lim, incidentally, we've got a gigantic downside. Your on-play effects do not activate. Oh. Yeah. We'll get more into this in a minute, but obviously, right now, if you're playing black decks in the One Piece TCG, one of the absolute best reasons to play black is Gecko Moria. Gecko Moria is one of the best and most broken cards in the game. So if you play Marshall D. Teach, you're playing a black deck that doesn't have access to Gecko Moria. That's, well, I mean, you do, but it becomes a vanilla 8 cost 9,000 power with no counter, and a vanilla will be 8 cost 10,000 power counter plus 1,000. It becomes a terrible garbage card. This is a static skill that doesn't turn off. This is bad, but it might be worth it. Because we've got activate main, trash a card from your hand until the end of your opponent's turn. On play skills do not activate. Oh, well, now admittedly, you do have to discard a card from your hand every turn, which is not nothing. Over the course of a game, that adds up quite significantly. But as long as you can keep trashing a card from your hand every turn, and bearing in mind black does play from the trash, so that is not necessarily a bad thing. We had all those cards back in, OP04 was when it really kicked off. We had all those cards back in OP04 that activate extra skills as long as you've got X number of cards in the trash. So a nice example of this would be, for instance, Trueno. Choose one of your opponent's characters for the cost of 4 or less and KO it. If you've got 15 or more cards in your trash, choose one of your opponent's characters for the cost of 6 or less. So, yeah, absolutely there are reasons to build up your trash. The discarding can be a pain, don't get me wrong, but black does have some benefits. You know, Luffy is a great black card we've seen see a bunch of play in the past that returns 7 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck and get a second use in single turn, and it can attack active characters. I mean, yeah, there are reasons to pad your trash. But essentially, this changes the game. Like, this completely changes the game. If you play Blackbeard, you have to build your deck differently. And like I've said, the number one thing here is you lose access to Gecko Moria, which I think we can all agree is probably the best black card around right now. Like, there's a bunch of good black cards, but Gecko Moria is the one that always comes around as an, oh yeah, no, that needs to be banned. Like, if you go on limitlesstcg.com and look at your average Gecko Moria deck, Gecko Moria, incidentally, is the good black leader right now. I'm not saying it's the only valid black leader, but I'm saying at this moment in time, in the EBO1 format, which is where we're playing right now, Gecko Moria is the best black leader. And if you look on limitlesstcg.com, you play 4 Gecko Moria in 100% of decks. But then again, you know what else gets played in 100% of decks as a 4 of? The Absalom from OP06 that returns 2 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck and then KOs a character of a cost of 2 or less. But that's partly the combo with Gecko Moria. That one is unfortunately gone as well. But Branu is an on-play skill. Now, that's mostly for the Navy package, admittedly. But, yeah. Helmeppo is an on-play skill. Sees a whole bunch of play. Dr. Hogback is an on-play skill. Sees a whole bunch of play. Perona is an on-play skill. Sees a whole bunch of play. Rob Lucci is an on-play skill. Sees a whole bunch of play. Victoria Sindri is an on-play skill. And Suru is an on-play skill. And Sabo. Sabo is a blocker, but also has an on-play skill. What I just did then was I just named the top 10 characters in the current EBO1 Gecko Moria list. They literally all have on-play skills. So when I say you've got to change the way you build black decks, you really need to change the way you build black decks. Now, it is worth noting that obviously Blackbeard is a 4 Emperors and a Blackbeard Pirate. So we're going to be getting more support for that in black in OP09. We don't know what the support package for this looks like. I'm not saying that you would have just taken Moria out and put Blackbeard in. Obviously, that's not what you would do. When I was mentioning those characters, the point I was making is black decks right now are all on play skills. You're not using them. But here's the thing. It is not the only deck that really relies on play skills. A bunch of other ones do as well. Take yellow, for instance. What are two of their most annoying cards? Charlotte Linlin and Charlotte Linlin. Now, the 10 cost from OPO3 says that you gain a life and your opponent loses one, and then the 7 cost from Starter Deck 7 basically lets your opponent choose. Either you gain one or your opponent loses one, but either way, it's I think it's fair to say a sizable win for you. Well, yeah, they don't activate anymore. And yellow decks that can activate either of those Charlotte Linlin skills, and we know the 10 cost is only for Big Mum decks, but the 7 cost is for anyone, any yellow deck. These are now both off the table. That is a pretty significant swing in terms of how good things can be. A Gadatsu from OPO5, great card, sees a phenomenal amount of play. Yeah, that's turned off. Charlotte Puddin, your Big Mum Searcher from OPO3. That is also turned off. It is not just, like I say, I use black decks as an example because we're talking about a black leader here. Make no mistake about it, a lot, and I mean a lot, of decks get crippled by not having access to on-play skills. So then you've got to ask yourself the question, and this is where this leader becomes super duper duper interesting to me, how much are you planning around it? Because Big Mum is a bad card without an on-play skill. It's a 10 cost 12,000 power, it's a generic character with no counter. Again, your generic characters have 2 more power than they have cost and counter plus 1,000. Big Mum is objectively bad without an on-play skill. The Big Mum from the starter deck should be a 7 cost 9,000 power counter plus 1,000 if it was a vanilla card, but it's not because it's got a great on-play skill. It is a bad card, and we keep going. I'm not going to keep going here, you get the point. It is a bad card, but the on-play skill makes it into a good card. And don't get me wrong, yellow still have all of their good triggers, so now if you're a yellow player, do you focus more on triggers and less on on-play skills? But then can you really justify not putting the Big Mums in when they're clearly ridiculously good cards? Again, if we use a limitless data here, basically everyone plays 4 copies of the 10 cost and 3 copies of the 7 cost in Katakuri, which in the EBO1 format is the best yellow deck. Can we really afford to not play those cards? Because we might play against Blackbeard? But then again, if we do play those cards, our matchup against Blackbeard becomes way, way, way worse. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is my point. And we're going to end up with a question of how much does your deck get hurt by this new Blackbeard? Like, take Starter Deck 10 Law, which over in Japan right now in the OPO8 meta is the unquestioned best deck in the format. Well, this is a weird kind of deck, right? Because the big new card, which has absolutely broken this deck, is Black Maria. And Black Maria's skill is an activate main, not an on-play. The new Charlotte Puddin has made a big difference, getting you extra Don, and that's an activate main. So you're not really hurt by that. The big new card from EBO1 that really helped out this deck was Kid and Killer, which gives you an effective 7k with Rush. But that's Rush. Rush is not an on-play skill. It is a skill that activates on the turn you play it, but it's not an on-play skill. So you still have access to that. You will lose Vinsmoke Reiju, that on play, if you've got less Don than your opponent, and 5 or fewer cards in hand, draw 2, that's a bit of a draw engine. You're losing that. You will lose Shachi and Penguin, that if you play it with Law's skill at the right time, you can get an extra 2 Don. And then there's a couple of other on-play skills, like, for instance, a Tama that you'll lose. But there's an argument that even though you are losing, and again, I'm not saying you're not hit, okay? I am acknowledging that Law has decent on-play skills, but I am saying I don't think it is as pronounced as some other decks out there. So are we going to see a shift towards playing some decks which are less hurt than Blackbeard? And the answer is, I've played a lot of card games for a lot of years here, and what's going to happen is this. If a lot of people play Blackbeard, everyone is going to rebuild their decks so they can survive without on-play skills. If people aren't playing enough Blackbeard, everybody is just going to ignore it and hope they don't play the 1 or 2 in the room. But if that happens, that really opens up the door for 1 or 2 people to play it and clean up because people aren't ready for it. This is a metagame warping card. The real question is, how many people take this seriously and how many people play it? How easily can top decks be rebuilt to be less reliant on on-play skills? Because the ones that can be will be absolutely fine, and I love this. I think this is super interesting. I cannot predict how this is going to go because we need to know how the players are going to react to really know how this is going to go. What I absolutely can tell you is that it is going to be fascinating watching this. This is going to make a big difference unless nobody ends up playing it. So there we go. That's the new leader. Super interesting, but I've told you what you need to know, and now it's over to you guys. Do you think enough people are going to play this to make it relevant? Do you think this is going to be a big card which is going to make a big difference? Or do you think it's not quite good enough? Let me know in the comment section. Go nuts! Be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at @TheWasi. That's where we talk about One Piece and a bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourself till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wasi Plays.